Welcome back to our live coverage of the United Nations climate talks. You've just been watching Elizabeth May, the head of the Green Party in Canada, and I'm delighted now to have Peter Vander Meulen with us, who's the coordinator of the Office of Social Justice at the Christian Reformed Church in North America. Peter, the first question I want to ask is, without meaning to seem rude, why are you here? You know, typically we expect negotiators, maybe some kind of more traditional NGOs. What brought you here?
Right. Well, there's sort of a short-term answer to that, and then there's a longer-term answer, and I'll kind of give both. But I'm here because the office that I coordinate has identified a changing climate, a warming world, as a critical cross-cutting issue, not only for those who are involved in human development, like I have been for most of my career, but also for the church and church folks. And I'll only talk about just the church piece of that for a minute. But people who belong and take their faith seriously, and not just Christians perhaps, but I'll speak from the Christian perspective. People who really take their faith seriously believe that this world belongs to God, that it isn't ours to trash. It's not ours essentially to profit from, although there's nothing wrong with using resources wisely. But it essentially was the whole world is created and loved by God. And so part of our faith life is to care for the creation. And when the creation begins to groan and be in pain, like it absolutely is right now, church people have to become much more active than they have been in the past. So the Office of Social Justice in this small Protestant church, which is a both Canadian and a U.S. church, has a brief that it's been given by our church, and that is to do education, awareness raising, and advocacy about caring for the creation and that includes a changing climate.
And what was it that really made you and your church identify this as an issue?
Well, we came at this really from a practical field kind of experience. We have an organization called the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee, and it's a fairly good-sized relief and development organization that has work in about 20 different countries. And in the 1970s, I worked in agricultural development in Bangladesh from about 1976 to about 1983. And that back then, you probably won't remember this because you're too young, but Henry Kissinger called Bangladesh a basket case. I mean, it was the place that would never develop. It was the place that would never be able to feed itself, but it did. In 20 years' time, it exported food. And it did that because of a lot of really good work on the part of Bengalis. And in those days, there was a small movement, eco-justice movement. There was a small movement that said, look, you know, we have to be concerned about ecology. And people would write me, and they would say something about this, and get involved with us. And I wrote, still have the email. It's very embarrassing. I said, don't get me involved in this. That's a rich person's problem. It has nothing to do with the small farmers that I'm working with who are trying to put food on their table. The ecology movement, or the earth-keeping movement, as far as I was concerned, had nothing to do with agriculture in Bangladesh. And over the years, I realized how wrong I was. Over the years, as I went through my career in Africa and other places, I began to get more and more concerned by what we were seeing in terms of weather patterns, by what we were seeing in terms of droughts that were not really easily explained. I came at learning about climate change through having to do that if we were going to be serious about development and especially about food production. So for instance, in Bangladesh, I was there just last year, and twice. I was there the year before and last year. And I went to the northern part of Bangladesh, which was a place that I had lived in for 7 years. And I know that area, and I know the rivers. I used to have to take my motorcycle across them endlessly to visit farmers. And one river in particular that I remember well used to be a perennial river, perennial river. It always had water in it. Now, like most rivers in Bangladesh, it would move, it would eat its banks away when the floods would come, when the monsoons would come, etc. But it always had water in it. And it was relatively small. You could sort of take a small ferry over it. It only took you 5 minutes. It was very, very, very small. Now, that same river, when I stood on its bank, I could almost not see the other side. It looked like a seasonal river in Chile, in the Andes. It was dry. There was nothing in that river in the dry season. And when we began talking about, and that surprised me, it shocked me. We began talking about that, we discovered that there were a number of reasons for it, but a big reason was the fact that the rainfall patterns had changed so dramatically, and more rain was coming in a much shorter period of time in the foothills of the Himalayas. Deforestation had occurred, glaciers had melted, and so there was nothing to absorb that water anymore. And it just came rushing down that river. It ate the banks out on both sides, and what Bangladesh has ended up with now in that area is a seasonal river that can no longer be used easily for irrigating winter crops, which has caused havoc in the farming systems in that area. That's just one small illustration of what's already happening in countries like Bangladesh, and that is due to a combination of factors that's exacerbated by changing weather patterns, which are exactly the kinds of things that are predicted by the models that we're using for a changing climate. So it's not a question with me and with most people that have been doing the kind of work that I have been doing around the world. It's not a question of whether you believe the science or not. It's already there. It's happening, and we have to deal with it. It's as simple as that.
And do you think that faith communities in particular are engaging with this in the way that they ought to, given the moral reasoning that you've laid out?
No, I have to say that the faith communities that I'm aware of, now I want to be very careful. The Catholic faith community has globally, has had strong background in this, and they have strong work in this. So that's sort of an exception. Also, the mainline Protestant community, at least at the leader level, has really been supportive of a changing climate. They've been supportive of climate justice. There's lots of statements. The religious community is tremendously good at making statements. It's also very good at ameliorating or helping in adaptation kinds of things, but it has not engaged politically very effectively, I don't think. And the evangelical community, which is, as you know, one of the largest segments of the faith community in the United States, the evangelical community has only recently begun to see this as a major faith issue. And for instance, the NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals in the U.S., not known for being a tremendously liberal group, that's an understatement, is coming out on December 13 with a new study or a new document that basically will say climate change is occurring. And it's very likely that human beings, our activity has something to do with that. And that is a religious, ethical question for us. That is a religious, ethical fact of life that we need to deal with and respond to in the depths of our faith. So I think it's beginning. The climate deniers, there's a very significant, but I think small segment of the evangelical church especially that have been trapped into denying that climate change is occurring. And that's associated with a whole host of other political positions. And one of the things that we're trying to do in my church, and I think in others now too, is to depoliticize and to take this out of the realm of a political football. It is going to damage our faith, it's going to damage our witness in the world, and it certainly has already damaged people who are depending on us in the U.S., Canada, Western Europe to make some significant changes in the way we live.
Why do you think it is that kind of the more charismatic evangelical churches have been so late to the game in this?
Well, I think the real reason is there's a whole bunch of reasons, but one of the significant religious reasons is most of the evangelical and especially the fundamentalists believe that God would never ever allow this earth to be damaged, that it can't happen. And I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I've been told that a number of times. What are we worried about? They'll say, what are you worried about? God isn't going to let anything happen to us or this earth, and anything that does happen is probably in his plan anyway. and maybe it'll hasten the end of the world. There are some people who are, apocalyptic, and believe the world will end. Mainline Christianity and most of the evangelical Christians in the world, and historically, Christians believe that the world, we have a doxology, world without end, amen. It means that God's going to renew the earth, that it's going to go on, and that it will be a wonderful, beautiful place, not an awful, polluted place. So they've got a theology. I mean, that small group of Christians in the U.S. and Canada and other places who deny that anything bad can happen to the earth are simply as bad theology. It really is. And they know. I'm not telling them anything new. They know that that's what our response is. But it's bad theology. It's even worse ethics, and it's just terrible for the earth. So I hope we can either move beyond them, or I hope a number of them are now convinced, given some of the new science that's come out, given some of the reports that are coming out of the various church denominations. This is real, and this is serious, and God is concerned about this.
And do you think that as these churches come on board, that it's going to be a really effective way of engaging people in this issue, that perhaps an avenue to engage people with climate change, especially in North America?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I had the answer to that, I would write a plan and try to get it funded and go at it. I'm not sure the best way to approach the average church member in the United States, because there's a great suspicion of politics. There's a great suspicion of leaders in general. There's a great suspicion of scientists, unfortunately, now. And I think the only way that it's going to happen, and I was just talking with Nick Talubali, who is the head or the general secretary of the Independent African Churches, which is a very large amalgamation of African churches. I think, and I believe he agrees too, that the conversation we need to have as Christians, and I would even say as the larger faith community, including Buddhists and Muslims and all of the faith community, we need to have a global conversation together about this. And we've not done that very well so far. What we have is local conversations and national conversations, and they all get stuck in the politics of it. But the faith community really doesn't have national borders. I mean, our first allegiance is to God as Christians, and secondarily to family or nation or something like that. So if we're going to have an authentic conversation that's religiously and ethically authentic, my belief is that it has to happen with brothers and sisters who are living in the vulnerable places. And only then are we, who have benefited from 2 centuries of industrial profligacy, only then will we realize what the situation truly is and who's being affected. And then maybe we'll get the grace to do something about it. So I'm convinced that we have to have a global conversation. It's a global issue, it's a global conversation, but those of us in the West and North have a really, really special and very, very heavy, in some ways, responsibility for the solution of it.
Peter, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us.